Well,
Another week.
Yeah. And what a week.
What a week again.
Yeah.
Every week is what a week again.
And there's right now everybody's meeting at the big bank meeting.
Yes.
Yeah. IMF, World Bank, trying to decide the future. But the problem is they don't have a plan. They're telling UK, it's foolish for you guys to be giving money to the rich when the poor are suffering. Telling the US stop exporting inflation. But where are the countries coming together to try to help?
Not only is there no plan, there are projections going back to the last couple of years. Every year they've been wrong by massive numbers.
Yeah, but I mean, you start looking at the metrics, how people measure things. Mm-hmm. And we know GDP doesn't mean anything because, cars, they go back and forth across borders.
That's right.
And they add to the GDP of both nations, but it's still one car. It's not like you're multiplying it. Yeah. And I mean, it really bothers me. We cannot solve. You can never solve an issue until you can measure it.
That's right.
And right now, it just doesn't seem that...
There's no objective measurement. I remember we talked about this before, a year ago, including the IMF and OECD and the others, talked about inflation for this year, 2022, would be 2.5 to 2.8%.
Yeah, but even back then we said, no way.
No way. But all those are the very prominent international economic organizations coming up with these projections.
How are people supposed to have faith in these entities when they get it wrong consistently? I don't mean occasionally, consistently.
And base their projections on very flaky basis, but even worse than that, they guide the economy on the basis of these flaky numbers.
Well, it's not only that. They're now in a position, 18 countries have received over $90 billion in aid. 28 countries have applied to the IMF for loans in the World Bank. Now, the idea is that these are the experts, that they know, because they're going to tell every one of these countries, you have to do X, Y, and Z in terms of changing your economy. But if the people who are telling you, if the teacher is consistently wrong, you start wondering about the results. I mean, the IMF and World Bank have been around for a long time. You would think by now they would have a formula or at least a methodology of approach that works.
To take a very simple example, you're absolutely right. The IMF talk about less government interference, freer market.
Yeah, and at the same time, starve the poor. Because,
that's right.
Trickle-down theory. Let the rich get richer and everything will be fine.
But what we see today is state interference. U.S. doesn't have a free market anymore.
No, I mean, this chips.
Yeah.
I mean, first the chips bill, and now they have these regulations, which basically, I mean, the South Koreans had to get waivers, one for 1 year and one for 3 years, so that they could operate their factories that are in Europe, that they can ship machinery there. I mean, I saw the headlines, all-out war on China.
China, yeah.
Tech war.
Yeah.
I mean, it just, I don't know how you could arrive at any other conclusion, despite the fact that, they say, oh, yes, we're not trying to take China down. Quite clearly they are. But I mean, I
don't think it'll work.
It doesn't seem to have an end game.
Yeah.
It's never worked in the past.
Yeah.
The U.S. has put its sights on how many countries over these many years. Russia's in the crosshairs. Before then, it was Venezuela, Iran. You go on into Cuba. Cuba's been in the crosshairs for what, 60, 70 years?
60 years.
And it's still there. And it's this tiny little country.
Yeah.
So whatever we're doing in the United States, it doesn't seem to be working. And maybe it's time to try something a little different.
If you look at the United States, Donald Trump tried something different. Very frank, very blatant, very honest, America first, screw you all, right?
Yeah, but how?
Now you have...
How is that a strategy for your neighbors and friends and
or
allies?
For global growth, yeah.
I mean, the richest country in the world says, no more Mr. Nice Guy. I'm just going to keep it all for myself.
That's right.
I mean, I don't even know what that means. But talking along those lines, we always talk 63% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Now, that was earlier this year. Now 71% are saying that wages are not keeping up with inflation.
It's factual. Wages could not keep up with inflation.
Well, the number came in 8.2%.
That's right.
And the markets went nuts.
The way it went nuts was also a little crazy. It started off down a couple hundred points and ended up 800 points, a swing of over 1,000 points. Looks like the speculators are running amok.
Yeah, but I mean, we're going to hear more about this because whatever somebody was trying, either they're going to make a lot of money or they're going to lose a lot of money.
Yeah, what again it comes to is the asset bubble. Yeah. You know, this type of blow up.
What do you think the repricing of assets needs to go to in order to, make sense?
30-40% down.
Wow.
Because if you look at what happened to Europe, for example, with the decline of the euro, the collapse of the euro, and also the capital markets in Europe, like what happened in the UK, what we see is a situation of assets shriveling.
Yeah.
And you're really basically looking at a number of the key countries, key economies in Europe, with the currency fluctuation built in, you're looking at over 30% already in decline.
I mean, just to explain it simply, when you have inflation and you want to make money, you have to get more money than inflation. So if inflation's at 8.2%, all right, and you want to make 10% on your money, right, you have to have 18.2% return. And right now, I don't see anything out there, but that would mean that you would have to reprice assets down to that level in order for people to feel
that's
comfortable.
That's why I feel that this asset bubble in the U.S. downside at least 30%.
Wow, that will wipe out
a lot of wealth,
trillions of dollars.
A lot of wealth.
Yeah.
It's already happened in Europe. 10% inflation in Germany. And then the GDP looks like it would decline this quarter.
Yeah, I mean, the Germans are trying to put a very brave face on it and say, "Oh, we'll get through this. Our manufacturing can absorb this, and we can increase prices." I don't know how you can increase prices
and be competitive.
And the energy costs will not allow them to be competitive in their own area.
I would even go a little bit further. I think there is a section of the population or the elite in Germany that blindly follows the US in talking about ideological issues and common values and so on and so forth.
I don't think you can eat those or heat your home with
any
of those. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. So, talking about more than 2 in every 5 Americans say a civil war is possible. That was according to a survey of 1,500 Americans by YouGov and The Economist. Are you shocked?
I'm not shocked. No. The polarization has really gone beyond anything I've seen or we have seen given our age and our timeline. It was pretty bad in the late 60s, early 70s. Kent State National Guards shooting students.
Civil rights marches where thugs were beating
and
beating up women, children, young men, white, black, didn't matter what.
That's right.
You were there.
I was there.
You actually witnessed this stuff.
And it was really pretty bad at that time. But at that time, it was more an issue of justice. The forces of justice, or young students wanted to fight against the war in Vietnam, against U.S. invasion of Vietnam, to fight against the discrimination against minorities in the country. But today, it's become more theoretically ideological than a simple right and wrong.
Well, but I mean, what is right and wrong? I mean, if you talk to the U.S., everything the U.S. does is right, no matter how wrong it appears to everybody else.
That's right.
And everything China does is wrong, no matter what benefit it brings to the Chinese people or to the region. I mean, have we reached this point where we're post-fact, post-hypocrisy? It's purely emotional. It's dog eat dog. Who is going to be on top of the mountain?
That's right. But it's not just China now. U.S. is now trying to beat up on even its own allies.
I mean, increasingly, we were at that symposium where it was quite clear the European, and this was at the ambassador level, said we cannot fully rely on the U.S. I mean, I think there's a growing sense that they have been played, that they've been pushed out away from Russia, and now the U.S. wants them to be dependent. I mean, for energy and food on the U.S.
and capital
at higher prices that they will
That's
make
right.
them uncompetitive.
That's right. I don't remember which was the Financial Times or the Economist. It was an article about Europeans calculating that U.S. firms are selling LNG to the Europeans at 4 times the price of their sales in the U.S.
That was Macron.
Macron.
Macron said that this, in the spirit of friendship and allies, from pure economics, you cannot sell to us at 4 times what you sell to yourself domestically, because you're going to kill our industry, obviously.
Yeah.
So there's a real sense. I noticed that the French have sent some LNG to Germany. But, one wonders if this is going to pull the EU together or tear it apart.
It's not only a question of EU. I think other regions in the world, things are changing and changing very rapidly, including the Middle East.
Yeah, we were talking about that. I mean, Saudi Arabia is being blamed for taking 2 million barrels per day. But I checked the statistics. Demand is scheduled to go down by between 3 and 5 million barrels per day.
That's right.
So if you keep 2 million barrels per day on there while demand is decreasing because of the global recession, slowdown, you would just be cutting your own throat. You would be literally lowering the price of oil.
That's right.
Yeah. And for some reason, they're the bad guy.
There are actually 3 aspects to this. I think one is the geopolitical aspect, where the Gulf countries no longer feel U.S. can be depended on.
And it's not the big customer, it's a competitor.
That's right. So geopolitically is one thing. What you're talking about is the market. In terms of the market, U.S. used to be the biggest buyer. Now they're the biggest competitor of OPEC countries.
Biggest producer.
That's right. And shipping it out and trying to take market share from the Middle East. So that's the market side. But economic security, you're absolutely right. There's no question when there's this global slowdown, like there was at the beginning of the pandemic last year, where people had to pay other people to take their oil. That's right.
No one seemed to think that was a problem then.
That's right.
It's funny how that goes. But I noticed that the leader of Qatar and also UAE have had personal meetings with Putin.
Yes.
And they're quite clearly signaling that there is going to be no cracks in the OPEC
Plus.
Yeah. Very interesting. I mean, it seems like things are churning very, very quickly. Not only the global South, including the Middle East, Africa, South America, ASEAN, and Central Asia.
That's right.
And it's not turning towards China. It's turning
away from the U.S. That's right.
And I think that's a nuance people don't really talk enough about.
Well, if you look at in the 1970s, what was the basis of U.S. invasion or taking very hard military action in the Middle East? It was the oil crisis of the 1970s.
Yeah.
That was the foundation. So, not a fear, but I see the possibility that the only way for the U.S. to reverse some of these situations is again by military action.
But is that going to work again?
No.
I mean, fool me once, shame on me.
That's
shame
right.
on you.
That's
fool
right.
me twice, shame on me.
That's right.
And I mean, I look at SCO. All right, now it is not a defensive alliance or anything like that. But it started out with 5 countries. Now it's just rapidly expanding.
That's
more
right.
and more countries want to be involved.
Yeah.
And you kind of wonder,
including all the Gulf states.
including all the Gulf states,
That's
which is
right.
kind of really interesting.
It's the only, I think, regional organization in which both India and Pakistan participate actively.
Productivity in the US is down 4.1%. It looks like employment is really strong, but 2 million workers disappeared between 2019
Left the
and
labor
today.
force.
Not only that, long COVID, 500,000 are estimated to be affected that had to leave the workforce because they could no longer fully function. So they moved from the productive side to the transfer side. They're not going to have to be taken care of. How long can you have 4.1% decrease in your productivity? I mean, it's a really worrying sign for the U.S.
And there's another aspect to this, Einar. I think when you lose productivity, right? Meanwhile, you're trying to onshore manufacturing from Europe. Doesn't make any sense to me.
How does that work again? We're not doing well, but we want you to come here and do poorly with us.
That's right.
You know, misery loves company. Isn't that
right.
the way they say it?
The U.S. is pushing very hard for manufacturers from Europe to move onshore to the U.S.
Yeah, but it's not productive. I mean, you can't be world competitive in the U.S. right now. Not with 8.2% inflation.
Not with 8.2% inflation. Not with
drops in productivity.
That's right.
Worker wages going up.
That's right. Also, the other part is aging infrastructure.
Yeah.
We found, at least looking at China, it's the new infrastructure, logistics, supply chain, which makes it super efficient in manufacturing.
I have a good friend. We have a mutual good friend who was just on the West Coast and East Coast, and he said he cannot. The places that he went to were the places that he used to visit and live. And he said he doesn't recognize them. He says the infrastructure, the roads, are so bad.
That's right.
And he doesn't understand it. And I think this is, when you live in this situation, you get used to it. But when you go away and then you come back, you really notice.
When you have a basis of comparison, looking at the infrastructure in Asia, not just China.
When COVID lifts, I hope a lot of people come to China and they see
take a
what
look.
Infrastructure it should be like. So in addition to that, the largest decrease dating back to 1948, which is when they started tracking productivity, right? South Korea, way down. So is Japan. We talk about this week to week. Nothing has improved, and yet they're talking about, well, maybe it'll be a short. I mean, Biden said, oh well, maybe we'll have a slight recession. We're already in recession. I mean, I understand that you want to win the midterm, so you don't want to admit that things are bad, but still, how long can you fool all of the people? Or
this is the thing about mainstream media. I find it laughable. They keep on stressing we are technically in a recession.
I never understand. You're either in or you're out. We know that. They say, well, there's a group of guys, and they announce generally years afterwards, yes, we were in a recession.
That's right. But this thing about being technically in a recession.
It's PR.
Yeah.
Pure PR.
To say that implies we're actually not in a recession.
Well, we don't know. Reasonable minds could differ. Like, the election. Reasonable minds can differ. Did Donald Trump win or did he lose?
Yeah.
There's always something. On the other hand, Chinese manufacturing, surprise up.
Mm-hmm.
Things continue to be very strong. The trade surplus
continues to be strong.
And money, FDI, foreign direct investment, is pouring in.
That's right.
So, I mean, as we talk about, you have the political side, and then you have the economic. And right now, the economic gravity is just, it's like the table is tilted and everything
to Asia.
To Asia. And it's not just China. There are other places.
Yeah. The other part about that is the more energy costs and basic living costs in Europe goes up, the more European companies, as we talked about in the previous session, continues to look for more competitive basis of manufacturing.
I know, but it's really hard. There are going to be a tremendous number of people who are going to be put out of work.
That's right.
And it's not their fault. I mean, the miscalculations, whether it was over COVID.
It's the fault of the government.
Yeah, but I grew up in a democracy, all right? I think I want to believe that democracies work. But right now, changing governments because they're unable to give you an easy answer where there's no sacrifice and it's all, 2 chickens in every pot isn't working.
No.
They change governments, but nothing changes. Look at Liz Truss. I mean,
2 weeks ago, huge tax cut all around. Today, talking about walking back 180-degree turn.
Well, the backbenchers, the people in her own party are plotting against her. She's only 2 weeks in the job.
That's right.
It's not good. She has one of the lowest approval ratings ever for a leader of Great Britain.
Or if you look at Germany, less than a month ago, the top leadership, including the economic minister and the foreign minister, talk about we have to disengage from China. We can no longer be innocent in our approach in China. And then 2 days ago, the prime minister says, China is our important business partner. We have to make sure that the relationship commercially and otherwise continue to move in a positive direction. These are your leaders of advanced countries?
Well, no, but they the problem with democracies is people go with the wind. Wherever, the wind blows, that's where they go. But, the wind doesn't blow consistently in one direction.
Well, we're reminded of what Chairman Mao says about the east wind, the west wind. What happened in Europe is basically the west wind, the U.S. blowing all this garbage on their mainstream media. Yeah.
No, it's really sad. I mean, the chip industry, we were just talking about this earlier, but I think this is going to further strengthen China. It's going to it's going to hurt in the short term, but you start looking medium and long term, there's no doubt in my mind that China has the capabilities to do workarounds and to come up with new ways of producing chips. And when they do that,
it's all over.
It's all over. The market is foreclosed.
Yeah.
The companies that are complaining right now are American companies who don't have markets for their products. That means they're going to get rid of people.
Yeah.
Profits will be down. I don't know how this is helping the American economy. And in long term, it's really going to hurt us. The global infrastructure, yes, we designed the chips, but those chips made us money. And the people who designed them, they had really, really good jobs. And I mean, way over 100,000, 2, 3, 400,000. These were solid middle-class people. Now, what are they going to do? Move to China?
Welcome.
Yeah, welcome. Oh, okay. Climate talks, COP27 in Egypt in November. It's supposed to be the place for serious climate action. If we look at what's happening with the World Bank and IMF, I have no confidence that the countries are going to come together and do anything remotely serious. And by serious, I mean tackle the issue where it is. They cannot have developing countries who have no money pay for the sins of the past,
of the colonial powers.
Yeah. And yet this seems to be the thing. There's always an excuse. And with money being very difficult, right? I can't see that there's going to be...
There are basically, I think, 3 aspects to this I would list. Number 1, you cannot tell developing countries, sorry, you cannot develop, or we're going to put a tax on your development, right, with carbon tax. That's number 1. You can't tell Africa you cannot have electricity. You cannot tell India you cannot develop further, right? So that is just not right, and no developing country would accept that. That's number 1. Number 2, all this stuff about ESG standards, I come back to that. It's Western-based standards run by consulting firms and accounting firms and law firms and investment banks of the West.
Fees, and more fees.
That's right.
But it won't change a thing.
That's right. You cannot impose this additional burden on developing country companies. It's just, and it's not going to happen. Developing countries won't do it. Third, sanctions on Russian gas, sanctions on Russian energy. What happens? European countries are now backing off their previous commitments on carbon neutrality.
Yeah.
Or we have to delay it by 5 years. We have to delay it by 7 years. Who's sticking to their numbers? China. The Chinese...
Well, no, there's been a lot more coal. Coal has coal consumption.
Right, in Germany.
And also in China.
Yeah, in China too.
Record amounts of coal are now being burned.
Yeah.
China is doing it, but I mean, at least they have a plan. They say this is a temporary, and we're going to change it.
Yeah.
The question is, will it actually work?
It will not work if the rest of the world is not working.
No, China can't carry the burden by itself.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. But there is another aspect to this, which the Chinese government is working on, is in terms of carbon neutrality. They are working out a China standard, which hopefully can be adopted by other developing countries as well, instead of what comes out of Wall Street.
Yeah. There was a promise of $100 billion a year in climate change financing started in 2020. Just hasn't come. I mean,
how much has come?
Not
much.
40. And that's if they double it. Yeah. So, I mean, we have a climate change apocalypse possibly on
Absolutely.
Earth. And you have the richest countries saying we don't want to pay.
That's right.
And the poorest countries obviously can't pay. So right now it looks like we're, all of these wars, it doesn't really matter because we won't be around to figure out who won.
That's right. And when you have issues like this, which is global in nature, like what we had with COVID 2 years ago, and the major developed countries are still playing politics, playing games, and pushing the burden on developing countries. I remember last year, there was a report, at the beginning of last year, that US government had so many vaccines which was not used until they would not give it to developing countries,
no,
even if they allow it to expire.
Well, I think that was more the pharmaceutical companies who were interested. No, that's still happening. They ordered 100 million booster shots, and only 4 or 5% have been administered. There has been So what's going to happen to those? I have no idea. I don't know if they're going to expire or what, but it really is trouble. Here was something that was really funny. The United States is not going to stop spying on Europeans' data, but it is going to make sure that spying is proportionate. Okay. This was the reassurance that the U.S. President Joe Biden offered concerned citizens across the Atlantic today by signing an executive order designated to restart the easy flow of data between Europe and the U.S. When you read something like that, you're like, oh, did I miss something here? We're going to only spy proportionately, and believe me, trust me.
That's right. And we'll give you the percentage figures so you can do a proportionate rate
in return.
We're going to monitor 47.6% of the data.
Yeah, but I mean, you constantly hear day after day, oh, China's spying on us, Russia's spying on us, disinformation, all this type of stuff. We have to keep our data secure. And now they're openly admitting it. Yeah, well,
proportionate.
I guess Snowden isn't exactly surprised
on
that. But I mean, it's just hard to know. Let's talk about Hunter Biden. He's under federal investigations since 2018. They're looking at how many laws he's violated. And whether his father knew about that, was an accessory or actually helping him. I mean, and it's been stalled for quite some time. But now they've said that they have enough evidence to actually charge him. I mean, do you think they're going to wait till after the midterms?
I don't think so.
I don't know. I mean, this has been an issue. Donald Trump has had his share, and deservedly so, of of investigations.
Maybe the two sides will make a deal.
Can't make a deal. Trump has nothing to offer. But I mean, you look at that, and then this week for Trump was unbelievable. The Supreme Court turned down his request to have the special master go over highly sensitive, top secret documents to determine whether they were work product or they should be not considered. It's farcical, and the Supreme Court voted unanimously. Right? This is a court where Justice Thomas loves. And Ginny Thomas loves Donald Trump.
They love Donald Trump.
And he appointed a number of the justices.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this isn't looking good for him. I mean, the AG, Attorney General of New York, has filed an injunction to prevent him from doing business. He cannot offer to any bank or financial institution any kind of idea about what his net worth is or what properties are worth, that he'll have to go through them. Be interesting to see if they get that.
What
very restrictive.
What potentially this means, along with many other things which have occurred, is that Trump may still have a base, but he's losing the support of the leadership of the Republican Party.
Well, the real litmus test is going to be this coming up in a few weeks.
Yeah.
Because if his candidates lose, and he will be held responsible for keeping the Republicans out of the House and Senate in terms of majorities.
Right.
And that is going to be, I know he'll spin up something that it was all Mitch McConnell's fault. But these are all
stolen elections.
Yeah, oh yes, that's right. They won. They didn't lose.
That's right.
But I mean, he's backing this guy, Herschel Walker, who's anti-abortion, except he's paid for an abortion when it was convenient with his wife, or that's the allegations, girlfriend, who coincidentally he does have one child with already. He has a bunch of them out there. That's a personal issue. But the hypocrisy of going out and say no abortions for anybody under any circumstances, and then
have it yourself,
having done it himself, to spare himself the expense or humiliation or whatever.
Was he? I think he was charged, but was he convicted of home violence?
He was charged by his wife. He was not convicted. It was not things. But his son came out and basically just said, "You're a liar. You're a bad father." And his retort is, "Oh, I love you, son, no matter what you say." I mean, as if these allegations weren't true. I mean, if this is the kind of person that Donald Trump is picking to represent America or him, or I don't know what he represents, it's a sad day in America. And he's not the only one. You have people in Pennsylvania, governors, representatives, senators, Arizona, who just claimed that the election was fraudulent.
Yeah.
They're still hanging on to this. They offer no proof, but they just say everybody knows. Everybody knows.
But what that reflects is, as you know, these politicians go how the wind blows, right? It means that there is still a populist base to this stuff.
How long? I mean, he's been subpoenaed by the January 6th committee. It doesn't look like he'll be able to avoid that, given his failures. He once again was unable to deny. Now, probable that he goes there and exercises his Fifth Amendment right not to incriminate himself. But to have a former president sitting in front of a congressional committee exercising his Fifth Amendment right, time after time after time, one wonders what the reaction will be, even among his base.
Yeah. His base has shrunk. The
question is, though, I sometimes wonder whether he will follow his his lawyer's advice, or whether he will just get to a
Rant
certain
and
point,
rave.
start ranting and raving,
Yeah.
and what that will look like in terms of the optics. It'll be interesting to see how that goes.
It's not very much different from how he was when he was president. He was ranting and raving all the time.
In Brazil,
Bolsonaro.
did much better than the pollsters.
That's right.
As I said. Now, I mean, obviously, Luiz de Silva only needs to pick up a very small fraction of
That's
people
right.
in order to get over. He was very close to winning it outright.
I think
But
it was 48% or something.
No, he was. It was almost 49%.
Yeah.
So he needs to pick up 1.2% or something, whereas Bolsonaro has to pick up 5 or 6%. My guess is that if you like Bolsonaro, you voted for him. You might not like De Silva, but if you don't like Bolsonaro, you'll probably sit on your hands. So, but the pollsters got it wrong. So could we. I do predict that De Silva will win, but I don't think it changes anything. I mean, you get a better government leader, right? But he has baggage. And in the end, the economic situation doesn't change just because you have a new leader.
I think actually the economic situation in Brazil has been actually quite good the last couple of years.
They have been weathering this better than most.
That's right. The currency has not declined very much.
Food, oil.
Because of their exports, right? Iron ore, food, oil, and even wines.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, no, Brazil, not so much wines.
No,
beef.
It's Argentina. Argentina and Chile and wine.
Yeah.
But the situation with Brazil is that this improvement is because of trade with China.
Yes. And you can see that quite clearly throughout South America.
Yeah.
That they're not interested in the narrative being spun by it. I mean, look at the Summit of the Americas. What a disaster!
That's right.
I mean, Biden had egg on his face like nobody's
So
business.
we can count. Mexico is improving its relations with China. Colombia.
And I'm surprised that the U.S. isn't being. I mean, given the Monroe Doctrine and they're taking Latin America for granted, I'm surprised they're not just walking down to these things and says, unless you do this, we'll start a war.
I think ultimately, Einar, the issue with America is it has its hands full dealing with domestic issues.
Well, it's also going against Russia and China at the moment. So.
That's right.
And it has wars that are still being
That's right.
prosecuted in Syria and
at
other
the same
places.
At the same time, they cannot project military power the way they used to. I was looking at I was reading a couple of reports that the dockyards in the U.S. have become so decrepit that even upgrading their warships has become an issue.
But how is it possible? So much money is flowing into
$800 billion. Yeah.
Into the military, and the Navy's been designated as a prime spot, and they're saying all these things have to be built in America. They temporarily halted small bits and pieces of the
You remember
of the airplane of the our F-35 because it had Chinese parts in it.
That's right.
Those Chinese screws, they might tell on you.
National security issue.
Yeah.
You remember, I can't remember the exact number, but do you remember a couple of years ago there was a report where the internal audit of the Pentagon talked about toilet seats on bombers, B-2 bombers or something, cost $19,000 a piece or something.
Well, there was the $12,500 hammer, which you could go down to that's the old thing. No, but what was interesting about that audit is they just couldn't find the money. There's billions of dollars, which you said, well, we don't know where it went. And this is the Pentagon. This is the group that you want.
Spend $800 billion a year on.
Yeah, no. Well, it's more than that. It's actually, you start adding in CIA and all the rest. It's $1.6 trillion. As of October 1st of this year, $1.6 trillion has been allocated to defense in its various forms. And this
Meanwhile, you have people living in the streets.
Yeah. That doesn't matter. All right, Elon Musk and the Twitterverse. I mean, it's like you never know which side he's going to go on. I'm going to make a prediction. He's going to buy Twitter, and then he's going to turn around and sue them for fraud and try to get as much money as he can back. In the meantime, he's talking about unlimited free speech on Twitter. So it's going to be a cesspool of every single kind of conspiracy theory, false information, battling against real information. He's an odd fellow.
He's an odd fellow. Zelensky is really pissed off at him too.
Yeah, I mean, all of a sudden he's going to settle things in one China. He's going to settle Poland. Not Poland, Ukraine. This really, I mean, his debacle with Twitter should have slowed him down. Instead,
not at all.
He's expanding,
accelerating.
I think it's time he takes a trip to Mars, calms down for a while.
With Starlink too, right?
Starlink. Yeah.
The Ukrainians are complaining that Starlink is down all the time now. They can't get communication going.
Well, just throw a few thousand more up there. I mean, they're the number one concern about space junk. All right, because the more stuff you throw up there, the more chances it's going to run into something.
That's right.
He doesn't really seem to think that that's an issue. I read this. There are more power failures in the U.S. than any other country in the industrialized world. It's according to Travis Hester, Vice President of GM, EV Growth Operations. 25,000 blackouts in California alone last year.
How many?
25,000.
25,000?
Yeah. Over $15.5 billion of lost commerce just in California. So...
Infrastructure.
Tell me again, onshoring? Is this the new advertisement with billboard? We have the most blackouts. You should come and set up your factory here.
That's why we're talking about infrastructure.
Yeah, but the issue, I mean, people don't understand, why doesn't the U.S. have better infrastructure, especially in power? Remember last winter in Texas, people were freezing to death because they didn't. It's because of the way they set up utilities. So the utilities can generally, it differs from state to state, but utilities can generally make money from delivering the energy, whether it's oil or electricity. But they don't get reimbursed. They can get low-cost funds to build infrastructure. But then that pushes, that's obviously an investment. There will become a time in the future where you get that back. But everything is so short-term now, none of them want to invest in infrastructure.
Wants to. No.
So the issue in Texas was much more about transmission lines, upgrading them so that they could withstand
all of which takes a long time to recoup your capital.
I know, but they won't do it.
They won't do it. They won't do it.
But why isn't somebody stepping up and saying, it has to change? We cannot, these are utilities, they're already regulated. Right? The state regulates the utilities. They determine how much profit can be made. Why can't they just take the extra step and say, look, we mandate you to do this. We'll give you a reasonable return. I mean, it just seems that
the answer is so simple, but it's not done.
But
it's not done.
Is it a failure of leadership? Or
It's failure of leadership. Or in the UK case, there's no leadership because it was just announced in the UK that you have 3 hours of blackout every day. In the UK.
In the UK, yeah. And it's going to come
more than
Germany.
India.
It's going to come to Germany.
It's going to come to Germany.
Yeah, India is only 2 hours.
That's right.
I mean, it just seems like the developed world is becoming like the third world.
Submerging.
Yeah.
Not emerging.
Going back to this chip thing, Americans are going to be losing their jobs. Chinese companies, because of these regulations, have had to tell their American employees, you cannot work for us anymore. You cannot work in any kind of R&D or anything because you're prohibited by these regulations.
You got to go to the Commerce Department and get an approval.
No, not individuals. No individual is allowed, and you can't get a waiver on that. You can get waiver as a corporation to do investments, to produce and things like that. But no American can help a Chinese or Russian or any other
entities list.
Any other company. I mean, from any other country. Only American. So you have a situation where there are going to be Americans pushed out of jobs.
Or Americans who give up their U.S. citizenship.
But
that's beginning to happen.
Is that really what you want? I mean, you want a nation where, people are walking away?
That's already happening in terms of the chip side. There are many of those who hold green cards or U.S. citizenship of Chinese ancestry who have started companies in China. What are they going to do? Give up their companies?
No.
They're not. So they give up U.S. citizenship.
Well, it's not that easy. It takes 5 years.
And I think 10 years of auditing.
Yeah, but the issue is that they can literally prohibit you during those 5 years. Long-term jurisdiction. If you stay in China, I guess you're all right. But if you go to Europe, maybe they get a warrant and grab you.
Yeah.
I mean, is this really what it's come down to? I mean, how is this related to security? What is this related to at all? You said earlier the U.S. has become a state capitalist.
That's right.
They're determining who is going to win and lose.
China is a freer free market than the U.S.
Isn't that an irony, though? I mean, and yet the U.S. complains that China is the one who's not the free entity. 31 Chinese semiconductor-rated entities have been listed, including medical companies. I would think that medical, of all things, is a common good. Any advances in medicine are going to be to the plus for all humanity. Now they're going after them.
It means after the chip sector, healthcare is going to be the next sector.
They could say that it has to do with data, but it's not true. I mean, a machine, you can just cut it off. It doesn't collect any data, or it just goes to your computer, and that's it. But I mean, it worries me the extent to which this is becoming a chasm between.
But in terms of that, more specifically, in AI, artificial intelligence, in the healthcare sector, China is moving much faster than the U.S. because of a much more digitized healthcare system and much more bigger database. So there's no question that AI depends on data processing and database. And the database is bigger and more complete here.
Well, there's definitely going to be more programs, and they're going to have better algorithms simply because they have the more data, and they can adjust those. China will be ahead of the curve. This digitalization, China's pushing on it really hard. We're trying to make everything much more efficient to guard its place in the global supply chain. If you can produce cheaper here, it's really hard to make a case for let's spend more money and produce it over there. And the countries that do that, they're adding inflation to their consumers.
Yeah.
So, hard to see. All right, this is where we get to the questions. Why did the U.S. provoke a war with Ukraine? This is from...
why did the U.S.?
Yeah, why did the U.S. push
the Ukrainians? Yeah.
Why did they provoke a war in Ukraine? I should say with Ukraine. In Ukraine. With Russia.
I will put it this way. I think that they needed to have an enemy. And then Russia is the obvious choice. The reason to have an enemy is to increase your defense spending, the military-industrial complex, and so on. There are some conspiracy theorists who would even go further to say this is a way of getting Europe to be beholden to the U.S., which may be true.
Well, if you look at the results, Europe has said they're going to spend 2% of their respective budgets at a time when money is hard to come by on what? Military. They're now dependent on American gas and energy and also food. So their economies are no longer competitive because of the inflation and things like that. So even if that wasn't the intent,
that's the result.
That's certainly the result.
And wiping out the euro as a global currency as well.
But at what point, I asked this earlier, at what point do the Europeans wake up and say, wait a second, we have been bamboozled, we have been, cheated, manipulated by the US. And whether it was intentional or not, it's what's happened.
But Einar, and I know, we have many European friends, including good Germans, very sophisticated Germans, who still continue to believe in the ideological common values thesis. You heard our German friends talk about, here's our chance to really go green, for example. Really go green?
I don't even know what that means.
Exactly. This means that we will be off Russian natural gas. So that means you'd be on US LNG.
Well, yeah, you're trading one place for another. I think they were saying that they would go to alternative things, but there's not enough capacity.
That's right.
And quite frankly, they would be...
If you go green, seriously, given your industrial capacity, means your industrial capacity will be diluted by 50% by the time you reach your green goal.
There's just not enough time or money to do this, and this issue is a short-term issue. We're talking about 2 to 5 years, maybe 7, depending on tankers and building these LNG facilities and things like this. At some point, it stabilizes. The question is, at that point, it stabilizes. Is the European Union a competitive place to build anything?
It's not.
Yeah.
European Union became very strong economically over the last couple of decades from cheap Russian energy, the Chinese market, and not spending a lot of money on defense.
Just want to digress a little bit. The metaverse. China is departing from the Western metaverse. They say that, look, this metaverse thing is not going to be some speculative
Ponzi scheme,
roulette wheel. We're going to make sure that anything that's done in the metaverse is actually productive, that actually leads to a positive outcome. Now, a lot of it is entertainment, so that's going to be hard to measure. But they're talking a lot about how companies use it, how it can be used in production, how the benefits of actually doing it. The West, you're not hearing that. Is that going to be an issue long term?
I think it will be, because metaverse, from everything that I see, AR, VR, NFT, and all this stuff, is not producing real stuff.
I can't eat there.
That's
I can't
right.
sleep there.
That's right.
And apparently real estate in the metaverse is way up.
That's right. That's right.
I'm homeless, but I have a mansion on the metaverse. I think there are some issues.
It's just like cryptocurrency. There's no real basis to value.
Ukraine. I want to talk a little bit about it. Ukraine couldn't get a loan 3-4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Literally. No one was interested in giving money to Ukraine. World Bank, nobody. US, everywhere. Now they've received billions, tens of billions of dollars. It's over 10 billion now in aid from IMF and World Bank. US has poured in over 50 billion. And then Europe has thrown in
billions and
billions. Isn't it odd? In order to get aid, you need to start a war?
You need to be in a war to get aid. It's a reflection of who runs the World Bank and the IMF.
I know, but This is a country with now $2,000 per capita yearly income. How is this money going to be repaid?
Oh, no, wait. It's actually more now, because half the population has left the country. So on a per capita basis, there's an improvement in their position.
I don't think so.
No,
I think
absolutely
not. It's been going down quite precipitously. But
this is the thing about ideological common values pieces.
But does Ukraine have a future? I mean, this war is going to grind on.
It would only have a future if an overall European security framework is established.
Merkel said that.
That's right.
Yesterday.
That's right.
Yeah, she said it's necessary. Russia has to be in any part of any security arrangement.
That's right.
But couldn't we have done that before?
We could have done
this war.
Absolutely. Instead of pushing in the opposite direction of pushing Russia.
The amount of death and destruction, the wasted money. I don't know who this war serves except the U.S. in terms of undercutting its allies. But even then, I can't believe even I cannot be that cynical to believe that they just simply said it. I think they say, "Oh, that happened. Well, maybe that's okay. Maybe it'll keep the Europeans closer to us." I've heard many people talk about how Ukraine was the key to galvanizing Europe to join, like-minded countries.
That's right.
E.g., the U.S.
That's right.
On that,
the U.S. in effect had a lot of benefits which they probably weren't anticipating, like the oil companies' profits up like crazy because of it. U.S. oil companies.
That I think they could anticipate. You got 40% of Germany's energy coming from that area. What happens to Russia? Let's say that we, 4 years down the line, there's only 3 possible things. You either Ukraine wins, Russia wins, or you have deadlock. Right? I don't know what win means, but can Russia ever be a player on the main stage?
They still have a lot of nukes.
They do. They have a economy that's smaller than Portugal's. It's less than it's much less than the state of California.
Much less than Canton Province.
Yes.
But I think on a global basis, the view of value is changing. If you look at the ruble, it's now much more valuable than before the war.
Yes.
Right?
And these were the sanctions that were going to cripple Russia.
Yeah.
Russia was going to disappear under a mountain of these
Chinese
sanctions.
expression, direct translation of word currency is 货币. It's composed of 2 words. One, 货, which means commodities or goods. B is currency that makes exchange for it. What this war has done, I think, is to change at least a little bit the perception of what currency is about. Currency has to be based on goods.
Oh, you mean crypto isn't going to work out? I better sell.
Or US dollars, which I just printed on the full faith credit of the US, right?
It seems to go on and on.
Yeah.
I mean, shouldn't America be worried about a declining Russia? I mean, think about it. All those nukes. Let's say Russia...
Go on the black market.
I know, but I mean, you already have the situation in North Korea, where there have been a number of now 20 missile launches.
Flying over Japan.
Over Japan.
Yeah.
It seems like he wants to attract attention. Why do you think that is?
Well, he's not doing well economically, and there are some serious food problems, fuel problems, and so on.
Who's going to answer this call? I mean, this is not exactly the knock on your door. Can I borrow?
Well, Donald Trump did. Remember how much he was in the press?
But there was no money exchange.
No transaction.
There was no transaction. From a transactional president, he got nothing out of it. You remember Donald Trump, the love letters, some of which he kept down in Mar-a-Lago?
I think he's actually, by doing this, Mr. Kim is actually going against his own interest. China does not want to see him flexing his nuclear muscles.
But I mean, isn't this going to empower all the hawks in
That's right.
South Korea
in South
and
Korea
Japan to say, look, we have to have our own nuclear deterrent?
Exactly. That's potentially what will happen. And that would be increasing the risk and the potential conflict to arise in North Asia, which is very serious. Yeah. You do have a extreme faction in the Japanese political elite, among the Japanese political elite, talks about nuclear weapons for Japan. Yeah. And they have the technology to build it at any moment.
Well, yes. What's interesting, though, is the current prime minister, very unpopular. He's from the peace wing of the party, but it looks increasingly that he's, in order to keep the party together, that he's going to pass through this Normalization Act, change the Constitution, do away with the pacifist clause in there.
I think that element, the pacifist side or the political military side of it, is probably less important at this point than the decline in the economy, the Japanese economy. When over 30 years, your GDP has not grown. Yeah. For 30 years.
Since they signed the Plaza Accord.
That's right.
Their economy today is less than it was then.
That's right. And so people are probably not very happy.
So what happens to Japan? Is Japan a threat to China, or is it a threat to the US, or is it a threat to anybody, or is it not a threat at all?
I think it's just trying to still play the role of a major country. But
it's the third largest economy in the world still.
Yeah, but they no longer have the influence. It's just like the British, the UK is no longer
living off old wealth.
Yeah, living off. Because when the yen was very, very strong, they made a lot of investments abroad and acquisitions, including Rockefeller Plaza, Rockefeller Center.
I think they have since sold it.
They sold it, yeah. At a
number of Chinese individuals and corporations bought a lot of high-priced American real estate and British real estate.
Yeah.
Those also been sold. That seems to be a nouveau riche thing, to run in there and buy a big building and then sell it at a loss.
Well, Hong Kong tycoons bought a lot of real estate in the UK when the pound was 1.6 or 1.7 dollars to the pound,
Yeah, I don't think that's working out very well.
That's not working out well.
Especially if they're paying it off in, depending on what they're paying their mortgage off in.
Yeah.
What can China learn from this war? Is this a prelude to what you think the U.S. will do elsewhere, somewhere else?
Absolutely. There are two aspects to this. One is they've seen how far the U.S. can go, 5,000 different sanctions on the Russians and so on and so forth.
And the ruble's higher than it was before.
That's right. And potentially sanctions on individuals, potentially all kinds of anti-market actions. That's one side that China can learn from and prepare for. The second part is how the war has been conducted. It's a digitized war.
Yeah.
Where
drones.
That's right, drones.
Cheap drones
satellites
are more effective than multi-million-dollar missiles and stuff
or
like
tanks.
And tanks.
That's right. So there's a lot to be learned there too. At the same time, I think the other side of it is critical for one to recognize that Russia's role in the world's economy and its economic relationship with the U.S. is nothing compared to China's role in the world's economy and China's integrated trade and supply chain and logistics links to the U.S.
Russia's never really done well with other dominant powers on its borders.
No.
And, there's always that question when, will Russia revert, if it can, I don't know if it can, to Europe and basically cut ties with China, especially over areas of historical influence, whatever you want to call it.
Mongolia, for example.
Kazakhstan. They were not as supportive as Russia wanted, and you heard hawks on the Russian side saying, "Hey, it's time to
deal with them. Yeah.
Deal with them. Time to teach them a lesson. They're not independent.
No.
We'll see."
Yeah.
Nordstream pipeline was blown up on September 26th. Now, I researched this. Last year, Biden said, if Russia invades, there will be no more Nord Stream 1 and 2.
And the reporter asked?
And then it happened. So...
Even the most pro-American forces in Europe are now conjecturing this was done by the Americans.
I know, but why? Once again, it comes back to this issue that if you cut off these pipelines, Europe cannot make a deal with Russia.
Which means Europe has to stay in the U.S. backyard.
I can't think of any other scenario. Can you?
Oh, I think the Seven Sisters might arrange for mercenaries to come in and do that. That would be very good for them.
Seven Sisters?
The oil companies.
Oh, the oil companies. Yeah, I don't even know if
it's a state action. It has to be a state action.
Well, there were American helicopters for some reason over the areas where big bombs went off. I think it's a coincidence.
You saw the tweet from the Polish deputy foreign
minister.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, America.
Yeah, he took that down after the State Department said, "Don't say that." No, they didn't say that either. They said, "No, we didn't do it." Wink, wink, wink. Oh, gosh. But I mean, destroying infrastructure, like strategic infrastructure in, other areas in the sovereign nations, I mean, that is pretty bold.
It's an upgrade. It's upscaling the whole conflict.
But I mean, where does it end? I mean,
nuclear.
Yeah, this is the problem that I have. You have things, and you actually have people in the U.S. that, no, they won't use them. That's the kind of thinking that leads to somebody actually
the bridge in the Crimea, right, followed by missile attacks all over Ukraine.
Yeah, including Kiev.
All of this is upgrading the conflict.
But there's no end in sight.
No end in sight.
Okay, on September 30th, the United States plans to open a command center in Germany to oversee and manage U.S. and allied assistance to Ukraine. At what point does Russia's already said that you're supplying munitions and things that are killing our troops. You are involved in this war. At what point do the Russians start attacking convoys coming in to Ukraine,
I think
outside?
I think very soon.
Yeah. More escalation.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to fix. And then we have the Crimean Bridge. Apparently they arrested 8 people, but obviously a terrorist attack, as was the attack on the daughter of that
that's right, Russian philosopher.
Yeah. So it just seems like we're once again going down the rabbit hole of an endless, bottomless pit of inhumanity.
Spiraling decline.
You think? How do you think? Do you think Europe is going to survive this winter?
Depending on what survival means. Their economies will
I think people are going to die.
Yeah, people are going to die. The economies will be collapsing all over the place.
It just seems so odd that this was preventable. And yet they literally walk into it.
That's right. Without any plan and contingency plans of any type at all.
It's just...
It shows the incompetence of the government in Europe and the leadership. There's no real leadership.
Okay. Well, got any last issues?
Things are not going well in the world.
Is there, let's leave it on a positive note. Is there anything that's good that's happening that you can think of?
I think two things, which has been gradually building over the last 4 or 5 years, is a recognition of how ludicrous the U.S. is in terms of treating other people in other countries.
That's not very positive.
No, the increased recognition is.
Yeah.
That's absolutely the case. Secondly, is more and more regional alliances among the global South.
Yeah, that is good. They're no longer a doormat to colonial ambitions.
Yeah,
they're really speaking up.
They're really speaking up, and they're speaking out for their own collective interest, rather than speaking out on behalf of the Americans.
We talk about collective interests and things like that. I mean, one of the big criticisms of China, especially over COVID, is that they say, "Oh, you're ruining the parade for everybody." And we talked about long COVID and the how difficult that is going to be if you start moving people from productive to unproductive.
That's
and the costs of society. But where does it end? I mean, it just seems like people want China to fail so they can say no one could deal with the situation. No one can beat COVID.
That's right. And the other part is no yellow horde can do it.
Yeah. But I mean, there seems to be a very, very strong thing where China pursues policies that are about dealing with people first.
That's right.
Not finances. Whereas everything that I hear from the World Bank and everything is always finances first, the people will follow.
Yeah.
And I think that's a major difference. We'll have to see how it works out.
Once this is the situation improves, like you said, when there's more global traveling, people can come to China more easily again. Instead of...
I think they'll be surprised.
Yeah, they'll be surprised.
All right. That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.